is now my pleasure to welcome to the podium Bob Watt.
Please welcome Drs. Meltzoff and Kuhl to the podium, and Dr. Kuhl is going to begin. Thank you, Pat. Welcome.
Thank you, Bob. We move this to the podium. Takes a little bit to get the technology working. Andy and I are so excited to be here today. We're often speaking all over the world, and it's rare that we get to speak in front of the home team. So we're really excited to be here to speak to you because we know that you're the movers and shakers here in this city. As Bob said, we're here in a very short period of time. Both of us are going to speak today. We're here to tell you in 10 minutes each, I'll speak first and then Andy, how the baby brain, the child brain works and why that's important to all of us. We want to tell you why early learning matters, how it's going to affect Washington State and in fact affect the nation and be a model for the world's development of how we deal with the young child and the young child's mind. I'm going to start with this slide that tells you something about how children learn. Bob mentioned that we have windows of opportunity in learning. And here's a window of opportunity for language development in learning. As you look at this curve, it has a surprising tilt to it. What you notice is that when children are between the ages of 0 and 7, their ability to acquire a first or second language is literally phenomenal. It doesn't matter if they're listening to Mandarin or Tagalog or English or French. They simply absorb that language and become masters of it. But what happens as you pass the age of 7, as you move towards 8 to 10, as you move towards 11 to 15, as you pass the age of 39, you literally fall off the map. So if any of you in this room are attempting to learn French or Tagalog or Urdu, I feel your pain. It's difficult. It's not as though you can't acquire that language, but you're going to acquire it differently. Your cognitive structures simply don't deal with it in the way that the children's minds do. Now, why is that the case? What's the magic of that first 7 years? What's going on early in development that makes them surpass our skills with our greater cognitive abilities and all of our EQ and IQ? How come we can't solve this problem? Well, at the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences, some of the studies we're doing on language development is really trying to get in and understand what are the babies doing? How can they master this skill that we can't? Here's one of the tools that we've been using in the last decade, and I'll show you soon a brand new tool that's going to get us even further. This is a little nylon cap being worn by a 7-month-old baby, and it's got little sensors in it that simply, while the child is listening to the sounds and words of languages, reports whether or not their brains are reacting. When we change the sound, change a word from pat to bat, does the brain show a reaction or not? Those children who show big reactions to a change in sounds of words or words themselves, will proceed along the path to language development much, much faster than those children whose brains don't react at 7.5 months. We can now take this measure early in development and predict the speed of acquisition of words and sentences out to the age of 3 years. And our recent studies show we can even extend that to 5 years. Now, that's important because early in development, we can see the children who may be at risk for dyslexia, who may be at risk for specific language impairment, who may be at risk for autism. And so these are the kinds of measures that we're trying to get at to understand not only the magic of typical development, how do we master language, this human ability that is so unique, it is unique to our species, but what's happening to the kids who don't quite get there. Now, we've been doing studies at the University of Washington in which we bring 9-month-old babies into the laboratory to test their abilities to acquire information from exposure to a new language. And in these studies, it's as like we're behaving as though this family has Mandarin relatives, and the Mandarin relatives have come and moved into their house for 6 weeks, and the speakers of Mandarin are talking to the babies in the living rooms and in the places in the house only in Mandarin. And we want to know how that experience for 6 weeks will change the mind and brain of the baby. So we give 12 sessions in the laboratory of exposure to Mandarin, and this is what those sessions look like.
Jasper, 早安 Finn。嗨，我们要来讲一个故事哦。今天要讲的故事是《小熊七七探险记》，来看看发生了什么事情哦。小熊七七在这里。好，哦，有一天啊，小熊七。
Now, are you learning any Mandarin? Okay. So watch this baby's eyes as the baby follows the speaker of Mandarin.
一个绿色的圈圈，绿色的圈圈，绿色的圈圈，转一下，转一圈，嘿，一圈，再一次哦，转一二三，两个圈，再一个，一二。
Okay, so for 12 sessions, the infants came into the laboratory and had this exposure to the Mandarin-speaking graduate students, and a control group was exposed just to the American graduate students speaking English. And we were trying to see whether or not the words and the sounds of Mandarin were recognized by the babies after this 12-session experience. And the answers in our studies, both behavioral measures and brain measures, showed that the infants were incredibly good at picking up the words and sounds from Mandarin after only 12 sessions between 9 months and 10 and a half months. And they well outperformed the control group who only heard English. You know, listening to English in the laboratory from the American graduate students didn't improve their Mandarin skills, which is good. As an experimentalist, you have to show that it's the exposure to Mandarin that differs. We were so surprised by this result. The kids were as good in America, who had 12 sessions, as the kids we measured in Taiwan. Recognition of the words and the sounds was identical, even though the Taiwanese kids had been listening for 10 and a half months. So what does it say? There's a critical period in development. Kids' brains are waiting for you to speak to them so that the sounds of language can be mapped, and it doesn't matter if they're listening to Mandarin or English or Tagalog. We were so surprised by the result, we did a further study. We brought in a whole new group of babies and exposed them to the exact same material, but this time they're watching over a beautiful DVD, plasma screen television set. The kids were glued to the TV. They came in for their 12 sessions. They looked for all the world as though they were learning just as well as the children who'd been exposed live, but the end results of our test demonstrated that the children exposed over television learned nothing. No evidence that they'd been exposed to Mandarin at all. They looked just like the control group that had been exposed to English. So, babies, children need people to learn, at least language, at least at this period in development. It's very, very important that we do the studies to understand. It doesn't just mean that when a child is staring at a television, that a child is learning from a television. So where are we going with this work? We need to know what's happening in the baby brain during critical windows of opportunity for learning. We have to know how it is that a baby can stare at a television and look interested in it but not learn anything from it. What's happening to the social areas of the brain and the language areas of the brain as a child is exposed either to a live person or to a language over a television set? Well, at the University of Washington in the year 2010, we will be opening a Regional Child Brain Imaging Center, CBIC, at the University of Washington. We need a machine that doesn't just measure what's on the scalp, what's emitted from the scalp as our little nylon cap does, but we need a machine that measures the entire brain at once. And here it is. This is what we're buying. It's from Helsinki. It's a magnetoencephalography machine. It measures the electrical and magnetic fields that change as millions of cells work together. That's what's happening right now as you listen to me speak. That's what's happening in my brain and your brain as we communicate with one another. Millions of cells are working together. There are 306 sensors in this helmet. It looks like a hairdryer helmet. And those sensors pick up millimeter changes in the activities in the brain, millimeter resolution with millisecond precision, and maps that. It's an engineer physicist's dream, maps it onto a bank of computers that lets us see what's happening inside the brain of an individual. Now, why we are so excited at iLabs about this machine is that it is the only one in the world that can be used under the age of 5. This is a completely non-invasive, completely safe, completely harmless machine. The baby sitting in a hairdryer and listening to the sounds of many languages as we monitor with the 306 sensors in the device what's happening in the baby's brain. And we'll be able to tell, because our tests are now suggesting that there are measures that will be diagnostic of disabilities such as autism. We will be able to see, we believe, that the social centers in the brain and the language areas in the brain are not activated in the same way in children with autism. And these kinds of measures can be done. This is a 6-monther, Emma, being tested in Helsinki. These tests we have done with even newborns in Helsinki. So we will be looking at the entire first 5 years, and of course adults can be tested in these devices as well. This is a machine that looks at lifelong changes in our brains and correlates those changes with our learning abilities. So where are we trying to get to? Well, we know there's an education gap, sometimes called a preparation gap. Our point is that you can't wait until children are 5 and get to kindergarten and first grade and expect the teachers to catch up those that aren't ready to go. Children who don't recognize their letters, children who are not ready for the pre-reading skills that you have to bring to bear when the teacher comes on the first day and tries to excite you about reading. We need the machines and the tests that look at children in the first 5 years of life because they're magical. And this last slide is just to show you, this is the drawing. We're finished with the pre-design phase of the CBIC Center, and this is a pre-invitation. We'll be pouring champagne and cutting the ribbons about 1 year from now, and we want you to stay tuned because we're very excited about what's going to be happening. I now want to turn the podium to Andy Meltzoff, who will continue the story.
So I'm going to talk about social emotional development. Bob also mentioned EQ, and we do know that that's as important as brain development and language development. I want to say a few words about that because at the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences at the University of Washington, we are interested in bringing brain development, language development, social, emotional, and cognitive all together on this special new initiative we have called the Developing Mind Project. One of the things that we know is that's obvious to everybody is that we're role models for our teenagers. We know we're role models for 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. What's not as obvious but is true is that we're role models for our 3-year-olds, even for our 1-year-olds who are sitting in the high chair looking out at us, looking what we do, and desperately wanting to be like the adults around them and act like us. And I have showed the following film down in Olympia when I was testifying down there in early learning committees, trying to communicate just how powerful early learning is and how much the children are trying to copy and learn from us. So this is some studies that I do about infants' imitation, children copying what they see adults do with very young children. And the film happened to be made when Alda came to my lab, and he was supposed to film me testing my babies on imitation behind the camera. But he got so excited that he ran in the room and he sat down next to the babies in Seattle and started playing with the babies. And the camera was rolling, so we have these outtakes of Alda in my laboratory at the university. So let me just show you what this looks like to show you the power of imitation. This is a 1-year-old looking down at a toy and then up at us. And then Alda just does a simple action, put beads in a cup. There's no verbal description to the baby. There she is. And she's happy at having copied the adult. Then I take a camping cup that I bought at REI, turn it over, squash it with my hand. She's never seen that novel Objects, looks at me, looks at the cup. That's how we do things at the University of Washington. Then I have Alda pull apart a toy that I built, put it back together. She looks at the toy, looks at the person, looks at the toy. Good pop. and I asked the movie star to do a really strange action, anything he wants that's unusual. There's a panel that I put in front of him, and he touches it with his head. The little Seattle girl is watching. Do you want to turn? The power of children watching adults is phenomenal. They want to be like us, and they are learning even before they have language. Their little brains are taking in what happens at the dinner table, how the older sibs act. They're copying it. It is a very powerful message. We test about 5,000 children a year at the Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences. I like to show this film to parents, to fathers especially, who might not know that their children are absorbing information this quickly. Now I want to skip to an older age to rapidly move through the program here, connecting early learning, K through 12 education, and higher ed. We're very interested in the development of academic stereotypes. As you may know, females are underrepresented in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field. Society is missing out by not having more representation of females, and there's a question of why that is. And we've done some research on that. The first thing is to show you that it is, using some statistics I'm familiar with. At Stanford University, for instance, psychology, which is not math, science, technology intensive, has 29% of the faculty are tenured, are female. The Department of Mathematics, only 3% of the faculty are female. So there is a discrepancy there. Why are there so few women in advanced math careers? Well, Larry Summers, who's the president of Harvard, had an idea. He's actually the ex-president of Harvard, in part for his idea about this. And he listed 3 possible reasons that women were underrepresented in university math departments. The first, he said, is there perhaps females, there was a lack of willingness to do high-powered, intense work. The second guess was that there could be discrimination during hiring and promotion practices. And the third, he said, men might have a higher math aptitude than women. It's this third one is the reason he's ex-president of Harvard University. But just to show you that it was based on some data, and it's actually the interpretation of the data that's at issue, here are SAT math scores over the past 20 years. And the red line shows females, the blue line shows male scores. As you can see, there is a large and dramatic gap where males outperform females significantly in every single year for the past 20 years. This is what he was basing his idea on, that perhaps there's an innate aptitude difference. Well, our hypothesis at the university is slightly different, but I care about this problem deeply because Pat and I have a daughter. Well, you heard we're married, so that's we have a daughter. And it happened that I was doing homework with her one day when she was learning multiplication tables in 3rd grade. And I remember it very, very vividly when I was helping her with 9 times 8 on the multiplication table. She was having difficulty. And she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Dad, don't you know that girls don't have to do math?" And I thought, you know, this is dramatic. I hope I'm not instilling that stereotype with it. Her mother is interested in physics and engineering and mathematics. Where do these stereotypes come from? Obviously, they're in the air in our culture, and our hypothesis is that it's affecting the little girls at a young age while they're still performing in math as well as the boys, and it affects them. And so our is that culture stereotypes might affect the little girls early. We might start losing them in the pipeline earlier than we thought. In order to test this, my colleagues and I at the university, Dario Savenchek is a postdoc working with me, and Professor Tony Greenwald and I, the 3 of us, have just finished a study that isn't published yet, but I thought I'd share it, which we think is very, very dramatic. We tested 240 kids, half boys and half girls, in Seattle from 1st to 5th grade, and we used 2 tests that we developed that had children be able to indicate to us whether they thought it was that boys or girls did math. One of them was a sorting task, and the other one was a self-report test, 2 of them that were really quite interesting. And it turned out that as early as 3rd grade, we have statistically clear evidence that the little girls and the little boys are reporting that boys do math, girls do reading. If you say, who does numbers? Boys do number. Calculators, boys do calculators. Storybooks, girls do that. Letters, girls. Reading, girls. Addition, boys. Abacus, boys. Computer, boys. Right? The little kids, this 3rd grade, have the world sorted out into the things that boys do and girls do. And the remarkable thing is at this age, the test scores of the girls and boys are identical. But by high school, of course, they diverge. Now, why do they diverge? Our hypothesis is not an innate aptitude difference, but rather that the girls are saying, math isn't for me, right? I don't need to be as interested in math. That's not what girls in our society do. The dramatic evidence that it may not be innate aptitude difference, but culture, and this is really surprising to us, we're going to go over to Singapore because the equivalent of the math SAT tests in Singapore, which did not hold the American stereotype, show, guess what? The girls systematically outperform boys on the standardized math tests in Singapore, even though the girls are below boys here. That suggests it may be cultural. In all our concern with society about how to raise WASL scores, how to get our test scores up, it turns out that working on raising female math scores might be a very easy thing to do if we can have some interventions that we're very interested in working on. So this is the fourth idea that did not occur in this large debate. Culture may push girls away from math. It may make a large difference in development, and we are extremely interested in that. The brain imaging device that you heard about will allow us to measure the development of this sort of thing, and we think it's terribly important. Now, I want to just in closing say something about the ecosystem for early learning, as Susie Levine, who's on our board and right here, has coined this phrase, the ecosystem for early learning in the state of Washington. We are fortunate to have 4 players in place that we believe need to be at the table to help improve early learning and have an integrated system. And they are researchers like at the University of Washington Institute for Learning and Brain Sciences, the practitioners who are working so hard with the young children, public policy, those folks in Olympia who make policy on early learning, and philanthropists in the business community, which represent many of the people here. And oftentimes in history and in states, only 2 or 3 of this group has gotten together. Sometimes researchers get together with philanthropists and there's money given to do very esoteric studies that have no real-world impact. But those are 2 people working together. Or public policy makers make policy for practitioners to carry out, but it is not evidence-based, or it is not done in conjunction with the philanthropic community, so it can't be sustaining. Our pitch at the University of Washington, and what we're trying to do at our institute, is bring all 4 of these players so we can work together to change the ecosystem of early learning and have a seamless system from early learning K through 12 and higher ed. We have some ideas to do it. We have a dramatic and dynamic board, some of whom are here. Bob Watt is here, Jim Moore is here, John Sable is here. Susie Levine is here. Our board are Rotary members and working with us, and we're very enthusiastic in working with you and others to try to change the ecosystem, make it more brain-based and user and friendly for children so they can achieve their maximum potential. Thank you.
We have time for a few quick questions, so please identify yourself so that you can get a microphone.
A year ago, we heard from John Medina, who talked a lot about early learning. How does your work collaborate his or refute his? A lot of people doing great things. I'm curious about the community we live in. Are you sharing ideas, et cetera?
Yes, exactly. We know John Medina very well, and he's publishing books that talk about the lifelong brain, how you learn when you're young, how you learn when you're older, and how the first 5 years influences learning throughout that lifetime. So I think there is coordination beginning to occur in the city of Seattle and with the work that we're doing that's influencing the state. The MEG Center is open to everyone in the Pacific Northwest. So this is going to be people coming from the Spokane and other universities in our state who will be doing studies. So we're pretty excited. And we will also be looking at the aging brain. We didn't have time to talk about it today, but one of the things that people are interested in is how does cognition slow down as that neural system changes. So there's a lifelong learning that's possible to investigate with these tools.
We have a
We're
question
also interested
here.
in the teenage brain. There's radical changes in the teenage brain.
Well, you just answered my question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a parent of an 8-year-old, a third grader, and we are working on our multiplication tables right now. He has dyslexia. It is really challenging diagnosing children with dyslexia. How soon do you think that your really exciting research will be able to help parents? I have a self-interest. I have a 3.5-year-old son, too.
Right.
Yeah.
Dyslexia and other language impairments are really, really interesting, and we're feeling very good about the fact that our brain and behavioral measures are now able to predict language development to the age of 3. Exactly what we are focusing on is the ability to distinguish sounds early in development. Children with dyslexia have trouble. They'll eventually have trouble when the letters look too similar, but they actually have trouble when the sounds are too similar also. And that we can pick up well before they're looking at letters. And so we think it's very, very exciting, and it also suggests some really interesting interventions.
And if I also can make one other comment, children with autism, we're doing some of our tests on imitation, as you saw. It's very difficult to diagnose children with autism prior to language difficulties, but the tests of the test of imitation are showing that we can perhaps use that as early detectors and assessments for children who will later be diagnosed with autism. So we're interested in bringing this together for early diagnosis.
Thank you. This is great.
We have one more question.
Sorry. I bet that our speakers will stick around a little bit afterwards for some questions. Thank you to all of the participants in today's program. Next week, the 11th of February, we will be meeting at the Westin Hotel. I will just be returning from Zambia, but you will be in the capable hands of President-elect Tim Bendokas. Zambia has 19 active Rotary clubs, and I will have the opportunity to meet with them to discuss the stresses and challenges that they face daily and how we in Seattle will be able to help them. I'm looking forward to sharing those conversations with you when I get back. The featured speaker next week will be Roger Williams, Fellow of the American Institute of Architects. Roger's an award-winning photographer and architect, and he will share with you some of Seattle's architectural treasures. The short program will be a salute to Seattle 4's former presidents, and we will also hear from Bill Bradford from the University of Washington Foster School of Business on an update on minority business owners. Monday was Groundhog Day. It's a day I've really never understood. It hasn't made much sense to me. Is it a holiday, a media event, or is it a revival of the pagan ritual that was started in the 1700s? Think about it practically. It's a whole day focused on a rodent from the marmot family. And over 25,000 people have dressed formally, topped hats, and gowns to witness history with a pressing question on their mind. Will Phil see his shadow or not? The drama's intense. At dawn in the morning of February 2nd, Phil is pulled from his cozy, electrically heated, I might add, burrow beneath a simulated tree trunk on the stage to give his prediction. Like most weather predictors, he's not very good. In fact, he's been wrong most of the time, 39% of the time. And like so many other prophets, this groundhog delivers his prediction and then disappears. So why all the fuss? Why is it that we feel we need to know what's going to happen in the world, especially about weather, when we understand the mighty force of Mother Nature? But we must try to do something. We understand that the scientific process is poor and the predictor is seriously flawed. Unlike Dorothy, we are not content to dream about a place over the rainbow. We need science, data, and even facts generated by a cousin of a squirrel. Even though logically we understand that the prediction is likely to be wrong, we still go along with it year after year. So let's do away with the fuss. Let's avoid the frigid early morning rising and resort to a simple coin toss. At least you have a 50-50 chance of being right then. Or better yet, let's stick with something that we do know, a prediction that we are certain about. Let's follow the advice of Dr. Kuhl and Dr. Meltzoff. Let's engage our children. Let's marvel at their genius, and let's accept that winter is here, at least for 6 more weeks. So stay warm. Until next week, we are adjourned.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.